Welcome to Journey of an Author with Alfred Muller. This is episode 3 of my video series. Sorry for different background again, just trying to find the right spot to actually record. I've been relying a lot on my family to help me out and using their living room, so I'm actually in my kitchen today, but I digress. This episode is going to be about timing. And before I get on to that, I'd just like to remind everybody that I am an independent author, and if you like what you hear in these videos, I can assure you that a lot of that is translated into my own work. I have 3 short stories out. Starts with Tears Trial, then Reaper Society, and then the classics. All 3 short stories, all 3 available on Amazon and Kindle. Tears Trial and Reaper Society are available in paperback as well. My next release will be my debut novel around Thanksgiving. I'm hoping to have the cover for that book and teaser for it out shortly. So keep an eye out for that. Also, check me out on my website. I'll put the links in the description below. But let's get back to timing. So, what is important about timing? If you are aware of comedy, timing is the precise moment in which the punchline is delivered. In comedy, what timing refers to is the moment the punchline is delivered. Now, a lot of the times if you go to a comedy show or if you're watching a comedian on one of the specials on TV, you can notice that some jokes don't hit exactly right. Now, the really good comedians, you don't laugh at every joke, but you can at least appreciate the humor in them. Poor comics, and this translates to writing in general, don't have their timing just right. Knock-knock jokes have timing built into them. If I say knock-knock, you say who's there, I say a word, you say that word who, and then I respond. That is the moment in which I deliver the punchline. The timing is set up for you, it's built in, you don't have to really think about it. More complex jokes, however, have the right moment in which to deliver the comedic line. And if you miss that, or deliver it too early, or deliver it too late, the humor in that joke could be lost. The same goes for writing. If you have a plot that you're trying to tease out, if you deliver too much of it in the beginning, the reader's not going to stay entertained through the entirety of the story. Now, if you deliver it too late, the reader may get bored and put your book down. There are ways to fit that in and make the story entertaining, but 1, you may want to check out my 3rd blog post, and 2, check out my previous 2 videos to see how you could kind of fill in that space. But let's get back to timing. For example, a character who is the leader of a group of people. She could be a queen, she could be just a general, she could be anything that you want for this scenario. But she has to deliver a emotional speech. Now, in the first chapter of the book, maybe it's okay if done exquisitely well, but myself included, most of us are not going to have that skill set. At least not to start, at least not on a first novel. But my point being, if you have a queen who's to deliver an emotional speech, and the reader doesn't know who this queen is, doesn't know who her people are, and doesn't really know the situation, the speech is going to fall flat. You could have all the right words, you could have researched every great speech known to man, and yet the reader still will not feel anything. They won't have a connection to the words that you're giving them. Really, in all honesty, they'll probably think, why do I care? Now that speech coming at the end of the book probably has a better chance to actually register with the reader. At that point, they know who the queen is, they know what the tragedy that has happened, that has occurred, and they can relate to the characters that have been involved in that. And a lot of my current influence and thought processes as I'm going through these videos is Brandon Sanderson. Great one that I am near finishing right now is Rhythm of War in his Stormlight Archive series. Timing is great in that. Towards the end of the book, without giving spoilers, you have moments where You really feel for everything that's happened just because it's been building over 4 books. Other examples, if you are familiar with the Amazon series The Terminal List, great book. I've read that, and its timing is good. It's got great moments where there's action and development, and also moments where you have time to think. I guess timing is a lot more in depth than just moments of deciding on what scene to put down. This goes to when you write your scenes. You don't have to write a book chronologically. You don't have to write chapter 1, then chapter 2, then chapter 3. You can start and say, man, that scene, I've been thinking about it for years. I wanna put that on paper. So go ahead and write it. It doesn't have to be chapter 3 when you're on chapter 2. It could be chapter 12 or chapter 27 or chapter 133. Just when you're writing the scene, have that in mind. What are you trying to develop? What do you want the reader to get out of it? If you want the reader to feel emotionally connected to the characters, perhaps build some scenes and chapters before you actually release that moment. You don't want to pull on heartstrings too much if the reader doesn't know the character. Unfortunately, or at least in my own opinion, I don't know how willing everybody is to easily sympathize with a character on a page. We're more likely to sympathize with actual people than we are written characters. If you tell me that a character has lost his wife and child, I can sympathize, but I can't really relate and I don't know what they're going through. So I need more context to actually feel that emotional connection to the character. And that is through timing. You want your placement of scenes to mesh with the emotional resolution that you want to bring out. Timing is also important in information release, conflict, and resolution. The information should be spread throughout the story in ways that are creative and inventive, and not just an info dump. I struggle with this sometimes in my own writing, wondering if I have released too much information in a block text, or was I as creative as I could have been when I let the reader know about X? That being said, in the editing process and you go through, this is just a bland page. I can add information here that would be more interesting, and it fits with what's coming next in the next chapter. There's timing. Is this a good point to let the reader know about this information? Well, if I let them know 7 chapters before the release of that plot point, then maybe they forgot about it, maybe they didn't realize it. If it's a big reveal, or if it's a smaller reveal, it could be fun for the reader to pick up on that little Easter egg you left them several chapters prior. Now, if something happens and then you release the information after the fact, that could be a good conflict building note, or it could fall flat because the reader's wondering why they didn't know that ahead of time. Again, more complex or intricate writing elements that I'm touching upon here outside of just basic timing, but this is why it's so important, because it ties into so many different elements of the story. With timing, you want to make sure that your conflict has a resolution before it has expired. Now, I talked a lot about conflict in my previous video, so I won't touch upon that too much. I'll try and gear it mostly towards the timing of conflict. And basically that's the resolution. If you have a love story, you don't want the characters to kiss immediately, but you also don't want to drag it out over a 7-book series and then finally have the characters kiss. You want to place it where it's emotional, you want to place it where it fits, and you want to place it where the reader feels accomplished. If you start off the book and the characters are in love immediately, and you don't put any conflict built in, and then by the end of the story they're still in love, where was the resolution for the relationship if you are writing a love story? If you are writing a fight, it could be fun to have, towards the beginning, a brutal beating of the main character. This way, when they come back and fight that enemy again and win, there's conflict resolution. And you want to build up to that, so don't just have no fights up until the main fight, similar to the Karate Kid. Daniel is bullied and beat up by people in his new town that he moves to. If Daniel was going to win the final fight, but he ends up fighting everybody from Cobra Kai in the middle of the movie, by the time that final conflict comes, there is no resolution that the reader is interested in. You've already sprung that joke or released that information to the reader so that when the final fight comes and Daniel wins again, the timing's off. It feels like a letdown. For example, Star Wars. Obi-Wan and Darth Vader face off in New Hope, and you know that there is conflict there. You know that there's a struggle that has existed, but you don't have Obi-Wan and Darth Vader fight in the beginning of A New Hope. You build it up. Luke asks questions. Obi-Wan is cryptic. And then the fight finally occurs after Obi-Wan goes through the Death Star and Vader finds him. But what's also interesting about that scene is the timing of Luke seeing the fight. He's trying to get away and is sidetracked by the fact that he sees his mentor fighting the greatest villain in the entire universe. And while the timing for Obi-Wan and Darth Vader's resolution has come, Luke's and Vader's has only just begun. And now, over the course of the trilogy, Luke is building towards that final conflict. They face off in minor scrapes and battles here or there. Minor. Luke loses a hand, so I guess not minor. But the idea that they do fight throughout, but it's not that final conflict. It sprinkles it in. You keep the reader on the hook, reeling them in towards that final conflict. Now, if you had all of the events of Luke and Vader fighting one another happen in one movie, and it happens to be the third movie, well then, what's the second movie? I mean, there's a lot of conflict taking place outside of Luke, and you still get the awesome training montage with Yoda, but there's something missing there. The reader almost forgets about Darth Vader, excuse me, as he is taking on the rest of the problems of the Empire. So timing isn't just about the conflict, it's about laying breadcrumbs towards that conflict. So you don't want to just spring a fight on somebody unless it has other purposes, at least if your main goal is conflict. As for resolution, this is basically with everything. The love story, you want to have it resolved at the right point. Minor conflict, you wanted to have it resolved at the right point. Major conflict, absolutely resolved at the right point. If you are writing comedy, you want to resolve the joke at the right point. And depending on your book, depends on when these resolutions actually occur. So unfortunately, it's not like I could just tell you outline for when and how to resolve certain conflicts, at least not in specific scenarios for your own work. Now, I can give advice on when to generally resolve certain conflict or punchlines or plot points. You generally don't want to let them dangle for too long without adding to or subtracting from. What I mean by that is with a love story, just because it seems to be the simplest one that I can use. If Jack and Jill let's use Romeo and Juliet. Romeo and Juliet see each other at a party. They fall in love at first sight, but they don't meet each other for 75 chapters. Well, there's no real story there if your main purpose is a love story. But if you have them meet at that party and then some conflict arises and they get separated for a couple of chapters and then come back together, there's conflict resolution, and then there's love story resolution. You have the characters be parted and then come back together, keeping the reader interested throughout the story. And then maybe they spend the night together, or they're together for a couple of chapters before they actually get to be separated again. The timing of these all depend on what conflict is going on throughout the story. But in general, you want to time things so that there are interesting points before you resolve conflict. In this case, you want them to kiss earlier on rather than later. You want them to profess their love maybe towards the end before a major conflict parts them or separates them. Or, in Romeo and Juliet's case, before they kill themselves. So, like I said, love story seems to be almost like a knock-knock joke where you can explain it a little easier and use it as a good example. As for large epic novels, timing is more of a delicate process. And again, I'm biased, so I apologize if you do write romance and you're watching this video and I am completely wrong. I'd love to talk to you in the comments about it. But when it comes to epic fantasy, I do find that it's more of a balancing act because you have so much more going into it. Pacing is something that I could talk about in a future video, which may or may not be reversed for romance novels and epic fantasy. But I digress. Epic fantasy, you have to worry about long stretches where you have to keep the reader entertained, and you have to time the moment where you introduce information properly, so one, the reader doesn't forget in the menagerie of names and plot lines that you're building, but also so that you can keep those plot lines separate from one another. When you have something like Lord of the Rings, the way Tolkien wrote it, he separated book 2 into 2 parts, where you get Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, Gandalf, all at one point, and then you get Merry and Pippin's story, and then those kind of mingle together, but then you get Frodo and Sam. The plot lines are separated. It's almost 2 books in one, so the timing can be resolved earlier in a book, because the plots that are being spoken about in the second half don't really have any bearing on the first half. Really good authors in fantasy can sprinkle plot notes and resolve conflict at the right time, even from a different point of view. If you have a mystery novel, you don't want to reveal too much information too early on, because if you're writing a mystery, you want the reveal, the punchline of that story to be the reveal of the villain, at least in most cases. You can sprinkle evidence throughout the book, but you want to make sure that you don't give too much away if you want that villain to remain hidden. There are some authors who let the reader know who the villain is right off from the beginning. And then watching the characters discover the information becomes important, because I already know who the villain is. How is it that this character can't piece those pieces together when I could have? So there are elements of timing that depend on genre. They also depend on the plots and conflict that you're building towards. So basically, timing is a fickle tool that most of the time is hammered out in editing. When you're writing, you just want to get information down, you want to get the plot done, and then as you go back through, you can read and see if that was the right point to put that information in. To go back to Star Wars for a second, it would make little sense if you waited until the final movie to reveal that Darth Vader is Luke's father, especially because the third movie is building towards that final conflict between father and son. He learns in the second movie that they're father and son. It would be the same as if you released it in the first movie. There's no real reason behind it just yet. There's a build-up in the first movie to have conflict between Obi-Wan and Darth Vader. The storyline or story arc between Luke and Darth haven't started yet. So to have the conflict resolution of Obi-Wan and Darth Vader solved in the first movie lends the second movie to build up towards now Luke avenging his mentor. But not only is he physically defeated, he is then emotionally defeated at the same time. This is perfect timing. To go back to the first example I gave about the queen who is giving that major speech, if I don't know who this person is, I've barely learned her name, I don't know where her people are from, I don't know their culture, I don't know who the enemy is, and I don't know what their enemy's philosophies or their philosophies are, in that chapter 1 speech, I don't care. But by the end of the story, if I've learned about the characters that follow this queen, if I've learned that she struggles because not just that she's a woman trying to lead a war, but she is a struggling mother whose son has to fight in this war, and she's dealing with the harsh realities of death. And then I learn about the son, and he's such a devoted son, or maybe not, and he maybe turns traitor, or the elements in this world that the author is building towards. And then that final speech, you can feel the grief because the son did turn coat, and she's now asking other sons and maybe even daughters to go out and fight, and knows that in this conflict she is sending them to kill her son. That can bring the reader in. That can really build up release the emotional the emotional dam that's been building for the entire story. Then, once that speech is given, the tears are flowing, the battle's about to start, the character is broken, the reader is hanging on to every word, and then the final conflict occurs. You have that buildup of emotion and then the release. That is where timing comes into play. So, in summation, timing is the tool that authors and writers alike use to properly establish when certain aspects of writing should occur, when certain elements of conflict should happen, the beginning of the conflict, the breadcrumbs that continue that conflict, and then the resolution. Placing them at the right time is how you keep the reader entertained and make the story overall fun and enjoyable. For humor, it's when you release that punchline. For romance, it's when the first kiss happens. It's when they get married, if they have children, when they spend the night together for the first time. These are all elements that are hit or miss because of timing. Even the ending of a story. We have the traditional story arc where you start in the beginning, major climax, and then layoff. But if you have the climax in the beginning and then the resolution takes the majority of the book, what's going on? And same goes if the conflict is at the very end of the book. Where was the resolution? Where was the letdown? Where was the slow progression into the end of the tale? So again, timing can make or break a book. It also depends on genre. It depends on your story specifics. But overall, it's an important element that you should really focus on during editing. Once you have the full story in your possession, and you may even want to try and plan out a little bit of the series if you're planning on a series, just to kind of get an idea of when you want to kill a character off, when you want the love story to actually begin or end, when you want conflict to arise. Is it as important in book 1 to have the main character fight his main adversary for the series, or can you wait till book 2 or 3 and really introduce the main villain? That's up to you. And I'd love to hear examples that I may have overlooked, or examples that you can find in works that you've enjoyed. Any conversation is welcome in the comments below, and I look forward to responding. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I look forward to the next one. I will be posting a mock interview in the near future, basically about my debut novel, The Water Crystal: Rise of Azrisol Kaimana. It is a series, so look forward to that, and I can't wait for the next video. Have a good one. A knock-knock joke, and before you hit the punchline, it's knock-knock. A brief example is a knock-knock joke. If I were to say knock knock and you say who's there, and then I say orange, and you, before you even say orange who, I say, aren't you glad I didn't say orange? The timing is off. And it's not funny. Then again, I guess in the right circumstances that could be funny. One example would be classic, which I don't know if I've ever heard the full joke or not, but a horse walks into a bar. Ouch! And before you even get a chance to say anything to that, or if you get to guess or anything on how the joke works, before you get a chance to establish the punchline, I give it to you right away. It's not funny, it's